This video will finish up the Chapter 12 handout and outline topics. So we were calculating the maturity value, which again, maturity value is the principal, the amount of the loan, plus the interest that you have to pay back. That represents the maturity value. And we had been doing some calculations. And so let's just finish off those calculations and then we wrap up with section 12.4. So the calculation number 9, this is section 12.3, question number 9. We have a principal amount of $8,600. Interest is $133.78. The rate is 8%. We are supposed to find time and maturity value. Well, the easy one is maturity value because maturity value equals principal plus interest. So we just need to add those two amounts. $8,600 is the principal, interest is $133.78. So maturity value is $87.33.78. So that's easy. Now we need to find time, and this question is to find time in the number of days. So we know that interest equals principal times rate times time, and we have the interest amount, $133.78, that's given. We have principal is given of $8,600. We know the rate is 8%, so 0.08. What we don't know is time, but we can solve for time by just solving that algebraically. So we get 133.78 is equal to 688 times time. 8,600 times 0.08 is 688. And so then time, if we divide both sides by 688, and again, you just are going to have to be using a lot of algebra going forward here, these next few chapters. So we then would solve for t, and t is equal to 0.1944. I'm just going to go out quite a few decimals here. Again, don't round any answers until the final answer. And so that would be how much time per year in a year, how much time of a year it represents. So if we want this in days, we're going to take it and we're going to assume ordinary interest. So we're going to assume 360 days in a year. So if we multiply 0.19447674 times 360 days, we get 70 days would be the time. And so you can solve using those two equations, just work your way through. Let's do one more. Number 13. The interest rate is 7 7/8%. The time is 200 days, maturity value $17,117.50. We are supposed to find principal and interest. Well, I know that maturity value equals principal plus interest. I also know that interest equals principal times rate times time. I know my rate and I know my time, but I don't know principal, I don't know interest, so I'm going to be stuck trying to solve that one. I do know maturity value, $17,117.50. I don't know principal and I don't know interest, but I know that interest is equals principal times rate times time. So I could substitute out the principal times rate times time for I in this equation over here, and I can get rid of the interest. So I can solve, I can substitute in for interest. I'm going to substitute in interest is equal to principal times rate times time. I'm going to substitute that in for interest in this formula, maturity value equals principal plus interest. So if I work my way through, $17,170.50, so principal times rate times time, and I don't know my principal, but I do know rate is 7 7/8%. If you take and convert that to a decimal, that is 0.07875. And time, they tell us, is 200 days. So 200 over, and we're going to do ordinary time. So that would be over 360 days. So that 0.07875, that is 7 7/8%. 7% would be the 0.07. 7/8, if you do 7 divided by 8, that is 0.875. So if we are converting that to decimal, we are going to move over 2 more places, and that's where we get the 0.07875 from. So if I rearrange things, I have 17,117.50. Well, that is like a 1 times P plus, when I multiply 0.07875 times 200 over 360, I get 0.04375 times principal. So we're just working algebraically through this. So that is equal to 1.04375 times principal. I can distribute that. And so then principal, if I divide both sides by 1.04375, I get principal is equal to 16,400. Now I can work my way to solve for interest, because now I know my principal. So interest equals principal. Principal is 16,400. Rate is 0.07875. Time is 200 over 360. And when I solve that out, I get 717.50. Or I could have solved it another way. I know that maturity value equals principal plus interest. So if I rearrange that, interest is equal to maturity value minus principal. And I know maturity value is 17,117.50 given, and I solve for principal is 16,400, and I get 717.50 for interest. So again, just like with the last chapters, you can sometimes solve things different ways and end up at that same place. All right. Last topic, section 12.4, is just rearranging what we've been doing and talk in terms of maturity value or present value. Again, maturity value, also sometimes called future value. Maturity value is equal to principal plus interest. That's what we're building that off of. And we are substituting for interest. Interest is principal times rate times time. So we are substituting in, and we can say maturity value equals principal plus principal times rate times time. Well, if we rearrange that and distribute it, we can, that is really 1P plus RTP. I'm just rearranging it. And that redistributes algebraically to maturity value equals principal times 1 plus rate times time. So we can use that formula to solve equations. And again, you could solve it, different ways, but this is another one to just use as a quick step to getting to an answer. So question number 3 from section 12.4. Question number 3 is asking you to find the future value or maturity value. Those are the same things. What is it going to be total in the end? Principal plus interest. We're going to solve for future value, and we are given principal equals 10,500. Rate equals 11%, and time equals 10 months. And we want to solve for future value or the maturity value, same thing. Well, maturity value, future value equals principal times 1 plus rate times time. So that is 10,500 times 1 plus rate times time, so 0.11 times 10 over 12, 10/12ths of a year. And so that is 10,500 times 1.091. And again, don't round in your calculator. I'm just going to go out quite a few decimals before I round that up, just for purposes of writing. But in your calculator, don't round. If you don't need to, don't round. So the 10 divided by 12 is a decimal of 0.09166666, on and on and on, 7. So when we multiply that all out, we get a total maturity value of 11,462.50. And that would be the future value, maturity value of $10,500 at 11% interest for 10 months. Or we could think of that as if I were doing an investment, what would I have in my investment account if I set aside $10,500 today and it earned 11% interest and I let it sit there for 10 months? I would have $11,462.50 in my account. All right, we can rearrange that formula. If we take in our saying that maturity value is equal to principal times 1 plus rate times time, well, if I divide both sides by 1 plus rate times time, I have rearranged this and solved for principal. And principal is equal to the maturity value divided by 1 plus rate times time. So if we know a future amount, we can figure out what is that in today's dollars. If we know that we want to have a lump sum amount of $10,000 in a year and we can earn 6% interest, how much do we need today set aside to grow it to that amount? Or we can look at the questions of saying if we have to pay back $11,462.50 in the end at a certain rate of interest, what is that? How much did you borrow to begin with? What was the principal? So principal is also referred to as the present value of it. So let's look at number 7. Number 7 gives you a future value of $24.40, and it gives you a rate of 6%, and it tells us that time is 100 days. And they want to solve for the present value, or the principal. What was the original amount? Well, present value, principal, is equal to the maturity value divided by 1 plus rate times time. Maturity value or future value, maturity value, future value, same thing. Principal, present value, same thing. Maturity value is $24.40. And we are wondering, so if we have to pay back $24.40 and it was 6% interest and we borrowed money for 100 days, how much did we borrow is essentially what it's asking. And again, we solved questions like that earlier on in this chapter, but this is another way to solve them. So we're going to take and go 1 plus rate times time. Well, that's a rate of 0.06, 100 days, ordinary time, so over 360. And you just work your way through. That is 24.40 divided by 1.0166. And again, don't round in your calculator until the very end. So just leave that decimal full as it is in your calculator. I'm just rounding here for purposes of writing it out. And so that is $2,400. So $2,400 borrowed principal at 6% interest for 100 days is a total maturity value or future value of $2,440. Which means that if this question also asked you to solve for interest, well, interest is maturity value minus present value, principal. How much do you have to pay back? $2,440. What did you borrow? $2,400, present value. That means you paid $40 in interest. Or if it was an investment, you earned $40 on your money. Question number 9, just do another one. The future value is equal to 8867.25. The rate, interest rate, is, I believe that one is 11.125%. And time is 6 months. So solve for present value and interest. Present value is maturity value divided by 1 plus rate times time. Maturity value 8867.25. 1 plus the rate 11.125. When you convert that to a decimal, that is a 0.11125 times 6/12 of a year. Time is always in terms of a year, so 6 months of 12 total in a year. And we just work our way through 8867.25. That goes to 1.055625 for the bottom when you multiply that all out and add it on to 1. And so we get a principal of $8,400. If maturity value is 8867.25 and the principal present value is 8,400, that must mean interest is the difference. Future value minus present value. Maturity value minus principal, same thing. That gets us interest of $467.25. And so we're just working with the basic formula and rearranging it different ways to help solve questions. And that is chapter 12.